Welcome everybody to the first talk of the speaker series for the Posthumanism Research Institute at Brock University. Today we are hosting a talk by Evelien Geerts, who is an interdisciplinary philosopher and a research fellow at the University of Birmingham, and an affiliated researcher at the Posthumanities Hub and the Eco and BioArt Lab at Linköping University in Sweden. Her work focuses on questions of identity, difference, and violence, critical posthumanist, new materialist, and Deleuze-Guattarian approaches, enterprising in post-Anthropocene crisis times. She previously has published in Philosophy Today, Women's Studies International Forum, and Countertext, and recently co-edited special issues on the Soma Techniques of Violence for Soma Techniques, Journal of Bodies, Technologies, Power, which is forthcoming in 2024, and Disabling Gender for the Journal for Gender Studies. I just translated is it a Flemish title or Dutch title?
Dutch, Dutch.
Yeah. In 2022, and her publications, the list of her publications and links to them can be found at her website, www.eveliengeerts.com. And today we are extremely fortunate to hear her talk about haunting spectro micropolitics, the powers of alt-right memes, and critical posthumanisms. A quick note to attendees, you are able to ask your questions and make your comments using the chat box right next to the live stream screen. I will be monitoring the chat box once the talk is over. So, but now I'm ready to pass the torch to you, Evelien.
Thank you so much, Christine, first of all, for the invitation, obviously. I am quickly going to see if I can, yep, it is showing up. So you should be able to see my screen right now, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So, well, thank you again, Christine, for having me. It's truly an honor, and good afternoon or morning or evening to everyone that is joining us digitally. I would actually like to get started with the critical theoretical nitty-gritty straight away, but I do have, I guess, one larger remark before doing so, and that is related to violence and memes. So working on and with, and often also against memes, that is ideas, styles, or patterns of behavior spread via communities, the internet and media platforms, usually wrapped up in a humorous package. Well, working with memes means that one has to deal with the potential reproduction of the affect, symbols, and power charge relations of production that these memes are charged with. I don't think I have to convince anyone of the fact that images possess a lot of power, especially so because we are living visually oversaturated lives thanks to the multitude of digital technologies that we're surrounded by and also somewhat technically enmeshed with. Technologies that basically extend the power that these images, or in this case, memes, have. And this is, of course, where violence quite literally enters the picture. So memes, and particularly the alt-right memes I will be focusing on tonight, or this afternoon, like the one depicted here, that is supposed to portray how alt-right / right-wingers are the normal family-oriented folks and the others are the scary ones. Well, memes, just like any other pop culture vehicle really, have a mediating function. A function that partly also frames and tells us how the events or phenomena that are being referred to by the meme in question should be interpreted, putting the meme's interpreter at risk of reproducing the xenophobia, racism, anti-Semitism, and so forth that are often mediated or fully embodied by the meme to be interpreted. In order to at least partly counter this, I have decided to censor some of the memes discussed. And given the blood and soil type of nationalism that will be talked about tonight, this afternoon. It is also important to note that references will be made to various expressions of xenophobia, queerphobia, and racial hatred, the glorification of imperial colonialism, and the eugenics and anti-Semitism that seem to go along with pandemic conspiratorial activism. And I'm putting the activism between quotation marks here. Referring to the pandemic, well, I'd like to delve deeper into the haunting spectrum micro-political capacities of memes. And I will actually be setting the scene by going back to the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, a pandemic that, by the way, not only messed up our space-time coordinates, as it is 2023 already all of a sudden, but also is still very much haunting us today. So I'll be starting with an introduction, critical theory in more than human crisis times. So since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, the world has been plagued by several resprouting ecological, economic, and political crises, forcing critical theory to constantly play catch up. Just think of the 2021 post-truth-driven Capitol insurrection in the US, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and global political fascism's reblooming, of which Schild Vrienden, Schild and Friends, or SNV, the Belgian Flemish alt-right movement that will be discussed here, is an apt example of. The meme image depicted here is that of Pepe the Frog, used by SNV as a campaign sticker, and it's not only a racist play on the kein Mensch ist illegal, no one is illegal movement, and the fact that the EU in 2019 almost forbade memes because of potential copyright infringements, but also addresses how SNV was under investigation for creating and spreading hateful memes, as we will see later. Now, these just mentioned crisis events, although all unique, are excesses of what Gilles Deleuze once dubbed societies of control. Throw in neoliberal governmentalities that combine capitalism's extractivism with bio-necropolitical experimentations, advanced digital surveillance, and social media that promote a divisive, as philosopher Chantal Gray puts it, algorithmically aided politics or algo-populism, and the argument of critical theory being in urgent need of revitalization starts to make sense. Having run in what seemed to be perma-crisis times then, the pandemic pushes this need for revitalization forward. The COVID-19 pandemic not only spotlighted what Deleuze and Guattari already brought under attention, that is that humans, and I quote from 1,000 Plateaus here, form a rhizome with our viruses, but it has also laid bare today's digitalized neoliberal societies of control's grasp on human and non-human bodies alike. And nothing demonstrated this bodily interwovenness of human and non-human subjects and their environments better than the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Similar to how memes operate after morphing into agential phenomena or self-operational entities after being created, this particular virus bursts of agential replicative potential and deadly virality. Together with the pandemic it provoked, the SARS-CoV-2 seems to have finally created more awareness about the fact that humanity is, at the end of the day, but part of a planetary collective under anthropocenic threat. How to form more than human assemblages to survive, like funny lolcat memes attaching themselves to hosts, the SARS-CoV-2 virus revealed a type of de-anthropocentrizing relationality, often of disabling and lethal nature. Next to its deadly virality, ongoing deadly virality, the COVID-19 pandemic also sharpened pre-existing differentiation, dehumanization, and disposability processes. The eugenic disregarding of vulnerable folks, mass exploitation of gig economy workers, and cruel culling of mink immediately come to mind here. But the pandemic simultaneously also gave the deconstruction of anthropocentrism and speciesism another push. Still wreaking havoc today, it has become clear that the SARS-CoV-2 virus greatly benefits from human-made commodification-focused production practices and infrastructural networks, comparable to how memes take advantage of social political movements and their advanced digital platforms. Now, taking the foregoing into account, it is clear that the more than human assemblages that memes and viruses are engendered by, but also co-engender, make for a humbling existentialist experience. Thinking with the agency, but also again, deadly virality of the pandemic and memes, means that a critical theoretical framework with a more than human lens is needed. And this is where critical post-humanist and new materialist philosophies come into play. These post-structuralist philosophies that accentuate the ethical political from the get-go question and queer traditional Western conceptual takes on human subjectivity, agency, power, and life and death. Interestingly, these critical philosophies, because of their criticality, simultaneously zoom in on moments of de-anthropocentrization while making conceptual space for the analysis of ongoing processes of dehumanization, something non-critical or more non-critical new materialist theories such as object-oriented philosophies and ontologies do not always make enough space for. And if you're interested in learning more about, let's say, my own take on these matters and the categorization of contemporary new materialisms, then you can check out my recently published piece in Countertext, where I added this mini cartographical overview, which is actually based on my larger digital cartography of new materialist thinking. Now, this talk will try to balance the focus on de-anthropocentrization and dehumanization by looking at far-right and specifically alt-right memes and how these are being increasingly politically exploited and used. When the far-right memes and the pandemic collide, memetic pandemic far-right activism, and again, the activism between quotation marks. For a cultural artifact, memes help humans express their thoughts and feelings. They, at the same time, are the digital remnants of a particular zeitgeist, and in that sense, perfectly captured the first 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic. Many folks actually utilized pandemic memes to put a humorous twist on their daily lockdown lives, but they also visually materialized a lot of political events, obviously. Examples of the latter are the Jake Angeli Q shaman and Bernie Sanders wearing mittens sitting in a chair stuck character macros or meme templates that can be used over and over again. The first set of memes here refers to viral pictures of the Q shaman, a QAnon or an American alt-right conspiratorial movement and Trump supporter that invaded the Capitol during the insurrection on January 6th, dressed up as a kind of Viking horned fur hat wearing shaman with American face paint. The second memetic series show politician Sanders attending Biden's inauguration while wearing a rather frumpy outfit, mask, and cute mittens. The original picture made its way onto Reddit rather fast and then respawned itself into viral memes on Twitter and other social media platforms, in which Sanders was randomly inserted into All-American and other pop culture scenes. Meme culture, unfortunately, also revealed its darker side during the pandemic, and this brings us back to the violence that I was referring to earlier. So by 2020, several pop culture characters like Pepe and Fieldsman, the eternal victim of Pepe's alpha pranks, as we will soon see, were already associated with American far-right activism, which encapsulates radical right, extreme right, and alt-right movements, actors, and political parties. So, like the far right and the extreme right, the alternative right, a notion coined by the American white supremacist Richard Spencer, is anti-liberal democracy, but there is also a major kind of accentuation of white identity and the metapolitical preservation of Western civilization by means of infiltrating and trying to influence and alter the cultural domain. Social media and memes play a really big role in all of this, hence this talk, obviously. Especially Pepe, a heavily stylized green frog with protrusive eyes, and actually quite an innocent comic book character at first, quickly morphed into a series of reactive memes, such as the feels good man meme that you see here, that from 2008 onwards was disseminated on 4chan, the alt-right's kind of gathering spot, and Reddit's Pepe the Frog website or platform. It is only during the 2016 Clinton and Trump campaign runs, however, that Pepe's dark populist side became more noticeable. Because of a pretty interesting investigative Daily Beast article, the links between Trump's various retweets of Pepe and the American white supremacist alt-right were fully uncovered. This particular meme is probably the most famous out of all of Trump's Pepe retweets. So the Trump Pepe meme shows Pepe the Frog, but with back then Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump's features. Arrogantly looking into the eyes of its Twitter audience, Trump Pepe stands behind the presidential lectern, implying an electoral win in 2015 already. Trump retweeted this memified version of himself in 2015, accompanied by the memetic message, "You can't stump the Trump," while fully aware of Pepe's white supremacist connotations at the time. It is this foregoing radical politicization of Pepe and other memes that, not that surprisingly, became immensely popular again in establishment critical milieus during the pandemic. So in January 2020, Trump strategist Steve Bannon was one of the first to politically exploit the SARS-CoV-2 virus in his war room pandemic. Using a weirdly put together racist image of the Chinese flag and the biohazard symbol as his show's logo, Bannon anticipated on President Trump's multiple extremely racist China virus tweets from mid-March 2020 onwards, which themselves became viral memes thanks to being circulated over and over again by Trump and his fellow conservatives, echoing the Orientalist yellow peril trope, a dehumanizing figure that constructs Asia as a viral existential threat to the West. Jumping on the above sketched American far-right political bandwagon, the Belgian Flemish extreme right party Vlaams Belang, Flemish Interest, or VB, ran tax-funded ad campaigns that reused the China virus memes in April 2020, but with their typical anti-immigration kind of totalitarianism rhetoric attached to it. Bebe's communication briefing suggested that, and I'm quoting them here, the communist dictatorial regime China purposefully released the virus and eventually will have to pay for it. Or as the middle image here says in Flemish, China lied about the virus, never forgive, never forget. The extreme right site, Schild, linked to VB, added fuel to the fire by disseminating so-called satirical anti-establishment COVID-19 cartoons and memes, including a meme of Belgium's lead virologist, Mark van Ranst, being photoshopped into a National Socialist-style portrait in the company of a masked blonde child and the words, "Jugend dient dem Führer," so the Hitler Youth serves its leader. And I think the connotations here are quite clear, unfortunately. So this twisted propaganda-like rewriting of the China virus meme brings us to Schild and Friends, or SMV, the Flemish identitarian alt-right group known for their memetic provocations. So SMV derived from the Middle Dutch Schild en de Vriend shibboleth, so used in the Battle of the Golden Spurs to single out French opponents because they would not be able to pronounce these words correctly, allegedly. Well, SMV doubled down on the China virus meme, and that connected to the anti-Semitic Great Reset conspiracy about the World Economic Forum elites supposedly exploiting the pandemic to install a global communist regime. Interestingly, SNV started out as a simple Facebook meme group way back, or groups rather, as both Make Vlaanderen Great Again, Make Flanders Great Again, and the Vierde Vlaamse Meme, the Proud Flemish Meme, are linked to SNV. Now, before exploring SNV's pandemic memetic meta-politics in more detail, however, a genealogical explanation of memetic theory is needed. So, digital memes, basically, which is what I'm focusing on, come in various forms and flavors, as Limor Schiffman in Memes and Digital Culture also argues. So there are three memetic genres: real-life documenting memes, audio-visual manipulation-focused memes, and then the third genre, which is a combination of lolcats, so cat pictures with misspelled captions, rage comics, affect-showing memes, and stock character macros, which are images expressing stereotypical behavior with added text to it that you can reuse. So the Bernie Sanders memes from earlier on belong to that category. It's actually the latter genre that is more prone to political exploitation because of this genre's retweakability. And that's also why I'm focusing on these particular memes. So interestingly, memes and memetic theory are rooted in evolutionary biology and psychology. So evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins coined the concept meme in the selfish gene. Combining gene and meme from the Greek verb mimestai, which means to mimic or to express by means of imitation, Dawkins conceptualizes memes as genes as cultural versions. So any type of copied behavior or ideas falls under this description, and that includes cultural praxis such as handshakes, clothing fashions, accents, and songs. These travel vertically from one generation to another, and like viruses, always also horizontally, leading to subcultural variations. So crucial to Dawkins' conceptualization here is the emphasis on evolution and survival. Out of all of the possible versions a happy birthday song could have, only a couple will eventually remain. So we're talking about the survival of the fittest, or in this case, the catchiest memes. Evolutionary psychologist Susan Blackmore says the meme machine then kind of tweaks Dawkins' definition of a meme as whatever kind of information is being copied from one person to another. And that what is copied eventually also takes on a life of its own. So the crux here is that although memes are also cultural artifacts and start as artifacts, each meme will eventually also use human behavior to get itself copied, as Blackmore puts it, thus expressing a certain level of agential power. So memes basically replicate themselves via human carriers or meme machines through virally infecting them. And given that they are selfish like genes, memes do not care whether the outcome of this infection is positive or negative. They just keep going. Although these two conceptualizations of memetic theory are interesting because they emphasize memes as virality and more than human agency, the evolutionary focus at the same time also obscures a lot. So naturalizing and essentializing memes as genes makes them a bit too rigid, as if memes do not have any political or querying potential. Over-focusing on memes agency, moreover, snows under the accountability their original human creators have as well, which I think is highly problematic. So there are some social constructivist or more social constructivist conceptualizations of memes. And they do come in handy as they underline the artifactual and contextual status of memes. So there are semiotics-based conceptualizations where memes are seen as cultural artifacts that can be read as pure text. Discourse-based conceptualizations where memes are seen as cultural artifacts revealing the societal and ideological system of power relations. And last but not least, visual rhetoric-based conceptualizations where memes are seen as visual sets of symbols that express social political structures and values. Interestingly, discourse-based and visual rhetoric focus approaches pay attention to memes as situated environments, making them better at revealing the flexible iconicity of the earlier mentioned Pepe the Frog. Starting out as a cartoon character, Pepe not only became associated with the global alt-right, but since 2019 has also been regarded as a symbol of political resistance in the eyes of the Hong Kong pro-democracy protesters. Despite the focus on context and flexibility, though, these two approaches, as I argue in my work, together with the semiotic one, remain invested in analyzing the representational functions of memes rather than examining what these memes social-politically perform and effectively provoke as agential phenomena. So the SMV,
sorry to interrupt. We are still looking at the slide with the far right memes and the pandemic collide. So I'm wondering.
That's also correct.
Okay, it is correct. Perfect. Because we had issues earlier with image freezing. Good.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
No, that's okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm actually switching slides now. So the SMV metapolitical case study that follows now shows us that memes, in fact, have co-set the pandemic political scene, requiring us to push the foregoing frameworks to their representational limits. And now I'm changing slides. So SMV's memetic activism. So SMV first gained notoriety in 2017 in Belgium through their memetic and metapolitical or culture-changing activism, which mainly consisted of coordinated trolling attacks and so-called shitposting, something media studies scholar Iko Mali rightfully labels as algorithmic activism. It is clear that the alt-right knows how to manipulate mainstream and alternative social media. So they rely heavily on many-to-many social media platforms, such as Twitter and Facebook, but also Parler and Gap, where information is harder to fact-check as there are no gatekeepers. Both Twitter and Facebook, moreover, depend on centralized algorithms, causing a tailored user experience that overlaps with set users' digital comfort zone, leading to the proliferation of various echo chambers that only make space for one, often alt-facts-filled perspective. Algopopulism, indeed. Now, driven by algorithmic activism from the get-go, SMV revolves around a far-right, bloed on bolde politics that strives for racial purity, creating second-class citizens on the basis of racialized, ethnic, and other identity categories. And this, in combination with conservative Catholic gender and sexuality values, has a rather contradictory homoerotic preference for hypermasculinity and male bonding activities. And for those that are interested in this, do check out media studies scholar Katrien Jacobs' work, and the references will be shown later on at the end of the presentation. So SMV's meme activism, characterized by the creation of hateful politicized memes, for which some SMV members are currently being sued under Belgian negationism and related laws, morphed into a more institutionalized anti-establishment alt-right movement when its leader, Dries van Langenhove, became an independent DB politician in 2019. So the alt-right went extreme right and really entered politics that way, a position he actually recently resigned from. This renewed focus has not changed SMV's reliance on memes. On the contrary, during the pandemic, which in the summer of 2021 coincided with the manhunt on extreme right soldier on the run, Jurgen Konings, for having stolen weapons from an army base, only in Belgium, and forming a concrete threat against Varans, the virologist I talked about earlier, SMV's memetic activism intensified. During the April 2020 lockdown, SMV's Make Vlaanderen Great Again Twitter, for instance, posted a meme that set the tone of how the Flemish far-right would portray virologist Varans during the crisis. That is, as a conspiring communist. So photoshopped into North Korea's dictator Kim Jong-un, hairdo included basically, the meme depicted here slightly suggests that the Belgian virologist, like the WEF, craves to control the world population. Being the shitposting experts they are, SMV in February 2023 also did a Valentine-themed photo shoot in front of Belgium's main Pfizer factory with female members who you don't see that often, holding plaques that read, "You make my heart skip a beat," or "You stole my heart." This is shitposting driven anti-vax metapolitics at its finest, basically. Also because the protest itself could always be minimalized as being very tongue-in-cheek, which is, you know, a typical characteristic of alt-right politics. Now, the pandemic itself is also heavily featured on Van Langenhove's own YouTube channel, Kies Dries or Vote for Dries. There, Van Langenhove posts videos of himself inserted into pop cultural meme templates, which are easily modifiable and hence more exploitable, as also talked about earlier. Especially the China virus meme spin-offs turned out to be fruitful meme political material. So in one of his first pandemic videos, published a couple of months before Konings, that soldier that went on the run, Van Langenhove salutes virologist Fadanst, who has again been memed into a Stalin-like dictator, as you can see here, funky mustache and all. Spewing pandemic alt facts, Van Langenhove then rants about how the narcissistic chief virologist and well-paid sadist Fadanst was directly responsible for the political implementation of the COVID-19 measures in Belgium, which he wasn't, while being pro the so-called importation of illegal immigrants in correspondence to the Great Reset conspiracy. In mid-May then, closer to Konings' disappearance, Van Langenhove posted a second pandemic video featuring another classic alt-right meme character turned template, NPC Wojak, the eternal loser who's not able to think for himself. NPC, which you can see on the right here, fully masked, but often also actually ball gagged with a QR code stamp onto his head, screaming, "Govern me harder, daddy," is shown standing next to an EU COVID-19 passport. The implementation of this passport-based system is then, not that surprisingly, although rather ironically, compared to the Third Reich's Ausweis, or freedom-restricting idea, which of course, never took place or was never actually made. The foregoing pandemic examples already illustrate that memes are more than just silly images, emotional coping tools, or zeitgeist remnants. They are also agential. They are entanglements of interacting agencies in and with the world, as post-humanist thinker Karen Barad also writes in Meeting the Universe Halfway, and are thus influenced by their environments and simultaneously co-set the political scenery. Once created memes, again in line with Baradian agential realism, have a performative essence, but between quotation marks here, of course, that, as Trump Pepe demonstrates, relies on their viral powers, the intentions of the audience that receives and rewrites them, and the political environment in which they come about, but also co-engender. This becomes especially clear when looking back at SNV's and related actors' pandemic activism against Fadanst and other establishment figures. Far-right memes co-engendered a climate in which it was possible for someone like the aforementioned soldier on the run Konings to basically take what he saw as the law corrupted by the establishment and virologists into his own hands. Now, the spectro micropolitical effects of these memes, as I will explain shortly, are difficult to trace via traditional memetic theory. So these theories merely zoom in on what is already there, or to put it in Deleuzian terms, the actual, and maybe even also the possible, as discursive and visual rhetoric-based conceptualizations reflect upon changing memetic templates, as noted in the Pepe case as well, but they never really take the virtual into account. So given that the virtual holds the many potential unfoldings of the actual in itself, such a perspective would not only make space for memetic affects, but could also better deal with the ever-changing politicization of memes and the concrete effects this process has. There is a philosophical model out there that would allow us to zoom in on memetic affects, effects, and virtuality, memes as artifacts in agential phenomena, how memes form a more than human assemblage with their makers, reinterpreters, social, political, and digital environments, and that on a larger scale could also revitalize critical theory a little bit at least in these ever digitalizing post-pandemic times, and that is Deleuze-Guattarian micropolitics, which, if we go back to my little cartography in the beginning, for me is really embedded in critical new materialist thinking. Now, Deleuze and Guattari in A Thousand Plateaus underline the contemporary importance of the political by claiming, and I'm quoting them here, that everything is political, but every politics is simultaneously a macropolitics and a micropolitics. With their concept of micropolitics, They theorize how human subjects, always part of human, non-human, and more than human assemblages, are not only controlled by political, legal institutions and structures of power, but are also shaped by neoliberal governmental micro-political techniques, such as techno-algorithmic surveillance, interiorized self-disciplining forces, slightly Foucauldian, of course, hidden social cultural norms about, for example, gender and sexuality, and other flows that are partly agential. Transposed onto memetic theory, then, micropolitics zooms in on how far-right agential memes at least partly consist of not so visible effective undercurrents of the macro-political, it is fully formed fascist and counter-fascist movements and political apparatuses. These, now often algorithms-driven, undercurrents are also dubbed micro-fascisms, and this is the concept I need here. So for Deleuze and Guattari, and I quote them again here, fascism is inseparable from a proliferation of molecular focuses and interaction before beginning to resonate together in the National Socialist state, meaning molecular micro-fascisms tend to set the conditions of the molar fascist state's formation, although the existence of such a state would not cancel out micro-fascist forces as they exist as people's desires, mindsets, actions, and so forth. Deleuze and Guattari explicitly underscore that what makes fascism so dangerous is its molecular or micro-political power, or again, simply put, the existence of these micro-fascist flows. Since micro-fascisms are connected to people's deepest desires and drives, micro-fascisms have the virtual capacity to become centralized or become macro-politically fascist, as they, for example, transform into political movements. Or, and this is the interesting part, they can also, and I'm quoting them again here, act as viruses, adapting to the most varied situations. It has to remain on the level of the micro-political, constantly adapt themselves to new situations and contexts, consequently creating new micro-fascisms, or lead to the emergence of counter micro-fascisms. And this will become important for my conclusion later on. So thanks to these micro-fascist forces, or in this case, micro-fascist memes, fascism, like desire, is scattered everywhere in separate bits and pieces within the whole social realm, as Guattari also claims in Chaosophy. Now, analyzing memes as micro-fascisms via a micro-political perspective then not only helps us understand memes' political scene-setting capabilities better, but this conceptual pairing also unravels a major characteristic of far-right and specifically alt-right memes, namely their spectro-micro-political nature. This becomes apparent when examining the quite horrible Do het opnieuw Leo or Do it again Leo meme from 2018, which refers to Leopold II, former king of Belgium and genocidal colonizer of the back then Congo Free State. And the meme I am only showing here in censored form for obvious reasons. Posted on the 11th of May 2018 on 4chan's politically incorrect board as a not so tongue-in-cheek racist response to a Hitler and Leopold II's comparison, said meme depicted here partly painfully captures a micro-fascist imperialist nostalgia. This is aptly depicted by the photo part of the meme showing a white colonial who, after a long reverse Google image search, appears to be the Belgian governmental official, Emile Gorlia, being carried around by Congolese man-made servants in what was then already the Belgian Congo with a capitalized K, which stands for the process of colonization. The archival photo that you see here underscores how this type of nostalgia occurs alongside a peculiar sense of mission, the white man's burden, where civilized nations stand duty-bound to uplift so-called savage ones, as anthropologist and poet Renato Rosaldo described it so well. A type of micro-fascist desire that can only be fully captured through micro-political memetic theory. That is, if we were to look at all of the material discursive respective layers of said meme and the more than human memetic assemblage it is part of. And the assemblage isn't fully put together yet. So the photo is partially covered by a drawing of a Black Congolese man with bloody chopped off hands, symbolizing the King Leopold II and later on Belgian state-approved atrocious colonial punishment for the enslaved Congolese who did not meet their rubber quotas. The tiny drawn-on Belgian flag, plus the Do It Again Leo text on the original 4chan post, makes this meme bathe in a haunting, imperialist, nostalgic atmosphere that is at the same time eerily anticipatory, thus queering space-time. A couple of months after this meme started circulating in 2018, 2 Black female concert goers were actually harassed at a Flemish festival by a crowd of white young men, shouting the words, "Handjes kappen, de Congo is van ons," chopping off hands, the Congo, again with a capital K here, is ours. SNV, of course, jumped onto this trolling opportunity immediately, and via Make Flounder Great Again, they posted a Congo frat party song text consisting of extremely racist lyrics and the refrain, "The Congo is ours." Facebook immediately banned the post, prompting 2 micro-fascist meme responses from SNV that can only be understood by seeing these as a part of a memetic kind of Congo assemblage. The first meme, on the left here, is a seemingly innocent children's drawing of a green frog that states, "Roses are red, violets are blue, the little froggy splashes around, the Congo is ours," which, read as being part of the Congo memetic assemblage, obviously refers back to the alt-right icon, Pepe. The second meme, posted 1 day later, also in Flemish, of course, shows Google search results where the song's refrain pops up with the comment, "When you want to look up a children's song for the Christian Youth Association," further downplaying the original song text as haunting genocidal colonialism. Now, employing a critical posthumanist and new materialist micropolitical perspective, well, that reveals how these memes reinforce their shared micro-fascist overtones, not even undertones, overtones. The seemingly innocent drawing, for instance, on the left, only becomes fully understandable within the Congo memetic assemblage, but also adds extra cruelty to the harassment case, the frat party song, and the original meme, because of its supposed innocence. The assemblage highlights the dismissal of some deaths as not worth enough, not grievable enough, not even seen as deaths in the full sense of the word, as noted by the Queer Death Studies Collective, consisting of Radomska, Lieke, and Mehrabi, revealing these memes as micro-fascism's effective investment in what cultural theorists Maria del Pilar Blanco and Esther Bere have called spectro politics, a notion that combines the bio-necropolitical characteristics of contemporary societies of control with the Derridian and Beradian conceptualizations of the time-bending spectre, a hauntological figure that symbolizes lingering injustices. Now, pointing at the Derridian hauntology-rooted critique of how today's societies of control produce certain subjects as consistently disenfranchised as would-be humans, the spectrally human, the Congo memetic assemblage performs a post-representationalist spectral micropolitics. These micro-fascist memes have a role in the bio-necropolitical denial of humanness and eventually the being made disposable of certain racialized, gendered, sexualized, well, by then, non-subjects. A role that unfortunately is gathered from the festival incident, and SNV's ongoing popularity has already had more than just a micro-political impact. This micropolitical reconceptualization of memes as microfascism, however, isn't all despair and desperation. I mean, we're talking about the revitalization of critical theory, not the death of critical theory, right? So this critical posthumanist and new materialist framework indeed posthumanizes memes as agential phenomena and thereby highlights their inner linkages with mechanisms of power that force certain bodies into that world and us left to die, to again quote the Queer Death Studies Collective. But this particular framework also has a major critical affirmative touch to it. And this is very Deleuzian. Spectral micropolitics is, after all, not just the politics of specters, but also a politics for specters. Space-time queering counter-conjurations that bring lingering ghosts from the past, whether marginalized, oppressed, silenced, or annihilated, back to the here and now, can always arise and rise up, demanding accountability. And counter micro-fascist memes, as will be shown in the conclusion of today's talk, are a potential micro-political expression of such counter-conjurations. I'm wrapping it up here. Queering counter micro-fascisms. As micro-fascist memes are never created in power-free settings, but co-evolve with their situated environments, they could also morph into or even engender counter micro-fascist memes. And this along the line of Deleuze-libertarian thought. Although counter micro-fascisms probably brings Foucauldian power and resistance to mind, so where power and resistance inhabit the same diagram and resistance is kind of power's negative mirror image, this talk, contrastingly, connects the counter aspect to the Deleuze-libertarian idea of resistance. So resistance as an ever-flowing line that, as Deleuze also states it in his Foucault book, is operating in a direct relation with the outside from which the diagrams in which power relations operate emerge. So instead of being micro-fascism's direct opposite, counter-micro-fascisms here are one of the latter's virtual modes. Now, since memes are incredibly complex entities, slippages of signification are bound to happen, and some of these slippages are rather querying, as we will see now. An illustration can be found by looking at SMV's recent political actions. So fueled by global far-right anti-LGBTQIA activism that preaches so-called the so-called idea of gender ideology, a bit of a catch-all term that stands for progressives supposedly taking over society and perverting children by means of emancipatory ideas about sex, gender, and sexuality. SMV has always positioned itself as defenders of traditional Catholic values, values that are in line with Pope Francis' recent views that gender is, and I'm quoting him here, one of the most dangerous ideological colonizations, making the world the same, all dull, all equal. So the way I understand it is that Pope Francis is a fan of difference feminism. Probably not. So despite SMV's hyper-focus on homosocial bonding activities, it is very clear that they are creating an alt-right, violence-drenched image of queer folks being abnormal and degenerate. Especially drag queens and queer, gender non-conforming, and trans folks are targeted as they are seen as the main gender ideology culprits. Examples are abundant. Think of this cringy SMV counterculture meme that you see here, where counterculture is now seen as the normal family, put between quotation marks, of course, and other anti-queer memes. An alt-facts-driven Flemish television interview from a while ago where Van Langenhove criticizes the so-called normalization of gender-affirming surgery as an ideological tool supposedly to turn children trans, while debating with one of Belgium's top politicians who happens to be trans, and more recently, a hate-filled live manifestation. It is this manifestation that I will use here to underscore the queering power of micro-political memes as countering. No, that's not a sentence. Let's do that again. It is this example that will basically be used to show what the value of counter micro-fascisms could be. So last 2 minutes. In order to get there, we need to take a closer look at the idea of mimesis, which has the same roots as meme, that is mimestai, and stands for the imitation-based representation of the real world. Feminist philosopher Luce Irigaray, or Irigaray, instrumentalized mimesis as a strategy to deconstruct processes of meaning-making. Starting from the idea that women have been pushed out of phallogocentric Western philosophy, women are instructed to assume the feminine role deliberately, as she writes it in The Sex Which Is Not One. By slyly mimicking the phallogocentric assigned role of the hysterical woman, the female subject, according to Irigaray, can destabilize phallogocentrism's internal structures. This memetic strategy brings us to a recent tweet by Van Langenhove, which includes a video of an SNV manifestation against a drag queen story hour for children organized in Bruges in early March 2023, which I will actually show now, and I'm hoping, please interrupt me if the video doesn't work. Can you see the Twitter website?
No, we're seeing the slide, queering counter microfascisms.
Okay. Technology. Let's see. Now you should see it. Yes.
Yes.
And let me see that the sound is also working. It's in Flemish, but I will translate. Oh, whoop. So yeah, I can stop there. Let me just quickly share the screen of the PowerPoint again. Well, so accompanied by a dramatic techno beat, as you heard, the protesting SMV members are zoomed in on while Van Langenhove's speech claims the drag queen in question to be a pervert dressed up as a woman, talking to children about his sexual fantasies. The viewer then sees various members holding up memetic SMV logo placards with the words, "Gender ideology is pedophilia," which is quite a long stretch. Van Langenhove then states that children should not be indoctrinated about anal sex or taught that there are multiple genders. A large blue banner then reads, "Stop the sexualization of children," is then zoomed in on, while Van Langenhove's speech ends with the words, "We will not allow you to push your psychological disorders and your degenerate ideology onto our children." The above is unfortunately very much in line with the current global far-right attacks against queer folks. The tweet itself immediately went viral, while one memetic image of Van Langenhove holding a gender ideology placard was strategically appropriated and not in a way that SNV would actually appreciate. So when the video was reposted on Belgium's main Reddit channel, various Redditors started ridiculing SNV's actions. Interpreted as a micro-fascist meme, Van Langenhove's placard image was strategically appropriated. So as you can see here, photoshopped and queered, albeit in a rather toxic manner. Latching onto memetic slippages of signification, the original meme morphed into counter micro-fascist ones. And although most of these memes were about Van Langenhove's small genitalia, supposedly, they were pointing at these slippages, limitations, and potential toxic masculinity as well. They at the same time also aptly mirrored SNV's obsession with people's genitalia. SNV's gender ideology construct was disused against them, engendering an at least partial queer deconstruction of the original micro-fascist meme. The resistance that materializes itself in the form of counter micro-fascist memes, of course, isn't going to completely undo the spectrum micro-political damage done by far-right and alt-right movements, their micro-fascist memes, and other metapolitical and political tactics. There are many other institutionalized macro powers of differentiation, dehumanization, and disposability at play that complexify the situation. What has hopefully become clear, or more clear after this talk, however, is that the critical posthumanist and new materialist lenses zooming in on micropolitical powers, and in particular the spectro micropolitical powers of alt-right memes, must be analyzed to paint a fuller picture of today's ever digitalizing societies of control. Memes and their rematerializations matter, and micropolitical memetic theory, zooming in on the not so visible, can give contemporary critical theory a much needed revitalizing jolt. And I'm gonna end here. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm looking forward to any questions you might have. And I'm also happy to basically provide maybe a PDF with the references later if somebody would find that useful to have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Evelien. And I had a good chuckle at Pope Francis being a fan of difference feminism.
Yeah.
I have to say. I should also say that the kind of memes you were referring to towards the end resonate particularly strongly with us Canadians, as there was yesterday the 1 million march that is a far right aligned movement that is doing exactly the same thing in Canada, trying to resist so-called wokeism and gender ideology in schools and whatnot. And so those are indeed troubling times. I just want to repeat that you can ask your questions or make your comments in the chat box. While people gather their thoughts, and I think you will be getting requests for references, as my colleague David Fancy mentioned, he would like to get a copy of them. So we'll facilitate contact between attendees and you, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So while people gather their thoughts, I was wondering, I've been thinking about these questions a lot, which is why I was so interested in hearing you talk about this. And I'm just wondering, because memes are basically circulated via social media platforms such as Twitter or X and Facebook and Instagram and whatnot, I wonder what roles the algorithms themselves play potentially in resisting the resistance. I have a friend who likes to exercise this kind of counter micro-fascism by recuperating memes and offering a critique and whatnot of what was originally presented by far right people. But he has often been caught by the algorithm and put in jail, so to speak, being prevented from further posting for a while and whatnot. And so I think, I wonder about that. It seems that for counter micro-fascism to be able to operate, there would need to be complete freedom in being able to share the materials, but also then the other question that I have in relation to that is, since there's been such heightened polarization in public discourse and in the political sphere in recent years, are we able to reach out? Can we really neutralize a micro-fascist meme, or are we just speaking to each other in our echo chambers, right? So that's a big worry that I have. Anyway, I'd like to hear you on this, and there are questions as well in the chat, so I'll turn to them after your response.
Okay, thank you so much, Christine. Yeah, These are really good questions, and these are, of course, the questions that I'm haunted by still. And I actually also design memes myself. It started as a nerdy kind of hobby during the writing of my PhD while I was in the States. And so it's called subversive philosophy memes. But you are indeed correct that when you use the images that you're trying to strategically like mimic in the Irigaray way, then that you get thrown into Facebook jail or in Twitter or X jail, or, well, not anymore because that's now a supposedly extreme freedom of speech space now that Elon Musk took over, of course. But you are correct that when you're strategically mimicking the same images, that you're basically dealing with the same obstructions, right? So, and I've had that myself many times, and I'm pretty sure that if I would have put non-censored micro-fascist memes, especially the Congo one, but also other more pandemic ones, on this PowerPoint, that we might have had issues. We would have had issues maybe with YouTube later on if it were to be deposited there. So it is a very tricky thing. I always, it's maybe Judith Butler said it the best, but I'm always, yeah, I always wonder whether there is an outside to phalagocentrism, or in this case, this fascist oppressive logics. I don't think we can actually do more than yeah, working from within the belly of the beast and kind of retweak these memes and find good spots for them. But then you're also right that we, as the counter meme makers, let's say, would also end up being trapped in our own echo chambers. That's definitely the case. I mean, the conversation that we're having tonight is probably an example of that. I am not sure how to how to even navigate this. I think the echo chamber issue is maybe the issue of our times, and will probably get worse in the years to come. That's not a very affirmative answer. I'm so sorry,
No. But also, as you say this,
yeah.
I'm reminded of the structure we have adopted for those talks, which is a live stream structure where I, as moderator, can also reinforce the echo chamber by not approving certain comments or questions if they were deemed to be offensive. So that's also interesting to consider, right? We want conversations and to remain respectful. And if someone was attending and had very different views and was not respectful in expressing them, I would exercise my role as moderator. So it's part of the apparatus of reinforcing these things.
Yes and no. I think what you're pointing at, though, is really interesting. You, as the moderating, you're mentioning respect, right? I don't think the fact that there are multiple views is a problem. I think multi-perspectivism is a reality, and it's reinforced through these echo chambers and algorithms and so forth. But the respect aspect and the accountability aspect that you're accentuating here does really matter. And there are ways to, I guess, for instance, ensure that when people, Twitter or X is now largely an anonymous space where folks just say whatever the hell they want because they cannot be identified. There are other ways to organize such a social media space by, for instance, forcing people to sign in with their actual names and maybe verify with ideas and so forth, which would make the space, I think, a little bit more accessible, and probably also a little bit more, yeah, I think it would create an atmosphere in which accountability would be, I guess, emphasized a little bit more. But this is, of course, a very naive reconceptualization of the Twitter or X space, because capitalism doesn't work that way, obviously. But still, Mastodon is a potential good example of how things could be retweaked and rethought.
Or Blue Sky, on which I am right now. So yeah, those alternative platforms that are emerging. But you're right. I mean, you know, signing with your own name and identity might put one at risk, depending on one's situation and circumstances. So there's
Yeah,
that.
also true.
Yeah, yeah. So Valentina is saying, thank you for the lecture, very interesting. I would have a question about the relationship between the esoteric and esoteric aspect of memes. It seems to me that there is a simplicity that serves the viral spread of memes, but also a complexity. For example, the viewer of the meme has to interpret signs whose meaning may be more or less simple or publicly known. For example, the figure of a particular historical figure. She says, while I understand how it can work in the meme sphere of the left, I have a hard time understanding it in the context of the far right. Can we say that there is a difference in complexity, or would that be superficial?
That is a talk in and of its own. Thank you so much for that comment, because it's really valuable, actually. Yeah, this always brings me back to comments made by my anthropologist friends who visit my own subversive philosophy website and have no clue and don't find it funny at all, because all these Hegel memes and Irigaray memes, they have no significance for them, basically. So it is true that in order to be able to interpret and also reinterpret and then retweak and then make the meme, the reinterpreted and redesigned meme go viral, you have to be in that space of not just the understanding of the meanings that are being portrayed by the meme, but also the remaking of the understanding of the meme. I'm making it a bit too complicated here, but so there has to be kind of a shared understanding of the meaning in question. I'm not so sure, so I agree with that. I'm not so sure what the second remark was about, though. The difference between memes on the left and then the far right, that there's no shared understanding of those memes in the far right by folks who are not in the far right. Is that what it was?
Valentina says, while I understand how it can work in the meme sphere of the left, I have a hard time understanding it in the context of the far right. So maybe a perceived difference in the levels of complexity of memes or meme activity in those spheres.
Okay, well, I would say that, first of all, I think that the memosphere of the far right is far more developed than the one on the left. Also, I'm not sure even if the terms left and right are fully applicable at this stage anymore, because I think the alt-right, everything is so blurred these days politically that I'm not sure if that even works anymore, especially when it comes to memes. But yeah, looking at far right and extreme right and alt-right memes, I would say that they're of an enormous complexity and also super multi-layered and being reworked time and time again. And I'm trying to look at the NPC Wojak guy with the mask and then the ball gag and everything. I mean, this is an image that has been used and tweaked like thousands of times, and always in relation to the context it's being retweaked. And so I don't know, I think the levels of complexity are actually very alike, and I think it might actually be harder to because look, those two images that I showed at the end of the presentation, where the alt-right guy with the placard is kind of being re-memed. So these are kind of counter micro-fascist memes in a sense, although they were all pointing at very toxic masculine understandings of sexuality and gender themselves. They were not that powerful. They were actually pretty lame, like calling Dries a pedophile and then saying that he has a small penis, basically. Like, I would actually argue that the memes on the far right side and alt-right side are of extreme complexity, and that we sometimes and often actually fall short when trying to retweak them in subversive and queering ways. It's actually very hard to find good counter examples. So,
I'm just thinking here. Might we say that the complexity, it's a complexity on the right that still is expressed via the simplicity of the meme. I mean, visually it is effective, but there's complexity in building the message, that is, and so, and maybe, as you're pointing out, those responses, you know, like the guy holding the placard saying he has a small penis, that's a very simplistic, in substance, simplistic response via a simplistic image, to a complex message carried through one image. So and so I mean, those of us who want to resist the microfascism of far right, alt-right memes are failing in using memes effectively as conveyor of complex substance.
You said it so much better than I did. Yes, I fully agree. And I think, you know, a little bit of extra digital critical literacy training wouldn't actually hurt here. And I think it would actually be great to kind of, come together as a group of activist meme retweakers and makers and start doing something. It is happening, but maybe not enough.
I think, you know, we were talking about respect earlier, and then I want to go to a comment by Adrian, but you know, what it makes me think is of how I listen every now and then to Michael Moore's podcast, Rumble, and he always complains about how Democrats are so, they're so careful, they don't want to hurt anybody, they want to be respectful, and he's like, no, that's not the way to respond. So maybe there's something to that in the meme sphere, as it goes. Adrian Downing wrote, would love to see your references, thank you. So yes, again, I can act as facilitator for this. They say, I don't have a question, just very grateful for your presentation. I am, however, reminded of a Masumi quote about how affective modulation must be met with affective modulation, and that comments just goes right along what we were discussing here. So did you want to say more about that, like the affective in how political discourse or the public discourse has become perhaps dominated by affect, and how memes serve to maybe reinforce that?
Thank you, by the way, to the person who made the comments. Well, I think it's pretty clear, and it's been an ongoing thing. I mean, I was in the States doing my PhD when the Clinton, Trump campaigns, electoral campaigns started, and for some reason, I feel that was kind of a tipping point politically. And okay, yes, I'm using the States, of course, now as kind of an example image, but it's so clear. I mean, everyone in the beginning was like, oh, or lots of Americans on the left, I think, were like, oh, Trump isn't going to win. Like, he's only focusing on people's gut feelings and like anger and all these affects and so forth, and that's never going to work. But you know, that's exactly how populism makes it work. So I always thought that was a tad naive. And then when Trump eventually won, I think that really started a different, or restarted different type of politics that we of course already saw in I guess the 20s and the 30s and the 40s of the previous century. So effective modulation, I'm trying to, I think, again, those two little memes at the end with the placards and the very simplistic counter messages of like, oh, you have a short small penis, and then you're a pedophile yourself because you focus on the sexualization of children, which is the extra added on meaning, of course, to that placard, is an example of just that. And so we're fighting affect against with affect, which is really highly problematic, but that's also because there is no space for nuance anymore in public debate, and there is no space for the critical pedagogical, let's say, a space where we could, with our differing points of view, actually engage in a nuanced and polite, self-accountable discussion. There's just no space for that. And to give it another example, so last week, a couple, I think 6 or 7 schools were lit on fire in the south of Belgium because people are, literally lit on fire, which is horrible. And it sounds like a Belgian joke, but it isn't. They were lit on fire because of the ESRA's declaration. So the idea is that children in primary schools from a certain pretty young age should get sexual but also effective and social education. But it's only like, I think, don't quote me on this, but 4 or maybe 6 hours a year. I mean, it's not that much. And it's been in the French, so Wallonian French educational system for quite a while, but it's been picked up by certain alt-right movements, by certain religious movements as well, that are cooperating in Belgium. And all of a sudden it became a huge thing like 2 weeks ago, and then schools were lit on fire. And it seems to be very hard to have a nuanced discussion about this because people are being fed alt facts basically about this particular sexual and affective and social education program, and are responding very effectively, and it's leading to what is actual violence. So I think the only way to solve this is to actually sit together and talk to one another, but then you see that certain politicians just also refuse to communicate about it and actually engage in a dialogue. So the worries are probably very real. These folks have worries, but the way that they're expressing them isn't very respectful, right? So I'm going to keep it at that, but I think it kind of underlines what the situation today is, basically, is that it's all about who shouts the loudest and not about who tries to engage in a nuanced discussion with folks that are of a different opinion, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Due to the marches that happened yesterday, there were a lot of radio shows and podcasts that talked about the issues, and one of the persons intervening was basically pointing to the fact that as desirable as a rational and respectful conversation is at this point on any of the issues we are facing, the level of anger that individuals are experiencing because they can't deal with the state of crisis in which the world finds itself is the main obstacle to even generating that rational, respectful exchange, and there's no willingness to hear another point of view because anger is taking over. So again, talking about affects, right? So I wonder, I mean, have we been civil and able to have these exchanges for as long as we did because the world was, relatively speaking, stable? I mean, there was still oppression, there was still exploitation and violence, but I mean, the last few years, as you were saying at the beginning of your talk, have just thrown all of this out of whack and increased the level of suffering and exploitation and oppression and whatnot. So I don't know, that's just a thought.
No, I think I would largely agree with that. The thing is, of course, and this brings us to, I also understand, like, let's zoom in on the counter protesters that are actually saying, hey, effective and sexual and social education is super important. also like trans rights and trans lives matter, etc., etc. I mean, obviously you become enraged because I mean we're talking about the literal well, I'm not going to say annihilation just yet, but the literal, yeah, oppression, hardcore oppression of folks that have always been in a vulnerable place and of a vulnerable status. And of course, that creates anger in those folks that are actually part of those categories, and rightfully so. Why are we, I also don't want to end up in a situation in which we have nuanced, you know, collegial debates with folks who are denying other people's rights to exist. So at one point you also have to say like, okay, great, multi-perspectivism, nice, but you know, there are basic human rights and these are the rights, and these are then also, let's say, the starting conditions of the that are operating at the back of the conversation that we're going to have. And I think that's where the problem lies, because yeah, certain folks will never ascribe to that. And then respectful conversation becomes impossible. And you see it with these Schild and Vriends guys as well, who are now actually, I think the lawsuits, after 5 years of research, legal research, the lawsuits started, I think on, what day is it? It's Friday, on Monday. And then they tried to like get out of it for a couple of days, and now it really started again. And yeah, they made 5 videos about it already. It's Friday, so 5 videos already about it. Multiple memes, like you hear, you know, the guys in the news everywhere, in every magazine, every newspaper. So they're so good at creating this or setting the scene in such a way that they're always the victims, but by playing the victim, they always also win, because it just becomes impossible to have a nuanced conversation with these folks, because everything you say they will use against you anyways. It's such a, yeah, it's such an interesting but also hugely problematic situation, right? And yeah, it has been exacerbated by the permacrisis times that we're in. I feel like we're not focusing on the causes of the permacrisis state enough, and are just letting ourselves be distracted by what at the end of the day, I mean, those anti-EVRA's protests, I think they managed to get 2,000 folks there, which is not a lot, considering, you know, the inhabitants of Belgium are like, what, 12 million, 11.5 million people. So we're letting ourselves be distracted by things that at the end of the day maybe shouldn't be focused upon that much. But social media, you know, they love it. Clickbait stuff. That's what it's about these days, I guess, unfortunately.
Yeah, not just social media, traditional media as well, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, you know, there's a whole analysis to be done of the of how headlines have been constructed and contribute to give visibility to what may very well be views held by a small pocket of a population, and amplified by these mediatic practices. So yeah. Well, Evelien, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your research on these very important questions. I think there's still a lot to think about and think through. And again, so thank you so much. And again, those of you who would be interested in obtaining the references to Evelien's presentation, please email me or contact Evelien directly through her website, eveliengeerts.com. You have your contact info there, I'm pretty sure, and then she can forward that whole list to you. So thank you. And I have another comment here. Thank you very much for the lecture and for the answers. So thanks again. This was a great start to our speaker series for 2023 and 2024.
And thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, have a good afternoon, I guess it's, yeah, for you
It's
guys.
still afternoon here, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, and thank you for accommodating this time. So I know it's late for you now, but thanks,
Okay.
and thanks everyone. Keep an eye on our Facebook page, my Twitter feed, or X feed, I don't know what to call it anymore, for announcements for future events and speakers. And on this, I will wish everyone a good rest of the day.